When I bought a new house, my parents showed up with a demand to hand over the house, claiming that it is a family asset to which they have a right, and then I'd been looking forward to my birthday for weeks. It wasn't just another year older for me. It was a fresh start, a new beginning. I had spent months planning a small family gathering at the house, cooking all of my favorite dishes, and getting everything just right. I thought it would be a celebration of us, a way to bring everyone together and maybe, just maybe, patch things up. My relationship with my family had always been strained, but birthdays had a way of softening things, even if only for a little while. So, there I was, standing in the living room, watching as my parents and siblings filed in, exchanging polite hugs and smiles. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that this time, things would be different. The first hour was pleasant enough. We ate, talked about trivial things, and I could almost forget the tension that always seemed to hang in the air whenever we were together. I was so desperate to believe that they were here for me, to genuinely celebrate my day, that I ignored the little hints, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations, the way my father seemed unable to look me in the eye. Then, just as we were sitting down for cake, my mother cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Alex," she began, her voice unnervingly calm. "There's something we need to talk about." A chill ran down my spine. I set down my fork, a sudden sense of foreboding settling over me. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. She exchanged a glance with my father, who nodded. "We think it's time for you to move out," she said, her words blunt and cold. "You've been living here long enough, and honestly, you're not contributing the way you should be. It's time for you to learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words didn't make sense, like they were pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. What do you mean?" I managed to stammer, my mind racing to catch up. "You heard your mother," my father said, his tone harsh and final. "We've done enough for you. You're ungrateful, and it's time you stop taking advantage of us. We're giving you a week to pack your things and go." I looked around the table, desperate to see some flicker of dissent, some sign that this was a terrible joke. But my siblings avoided my gaze, their faces expressionless, as if they had been waiting for this moment, too. "But it's my birthday," I whispered, feeling the sting of tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I had invited them here to celebrate, to share in the one day that was supposed to be mine. And now, they were taking even that away. "That's exactly the problem," my mother said, her tone laced with irritation. "You think everything is about you, Alex. You think we owe you something just because you were born. Well, we don't. It's time for you to grow up and stop expecting us to clean up after you." The words cut deeper than I could have imagined. I had always known that our relationship was complicated, that there were unspoken resentments simmering beneath the surface. But I had never thought they would go this far, that they would choose my birthday to throw me out like I was nothing. I stood up, feeling the ground shift beneath me, my heart breaking as I looked at the faces of the people I had thought I could trust. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "If that's how you feel, I'll leave. But don't expect me to come back." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, my chest tight with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and despair. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a few belongings I had managed to grab on my way out. As I walked down the street, I felt the tears begin to fall, hot and bitter, each one a reminder of the family I had lost. For days, I wandered, crashing on friends' couches, trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, searching for some clue, some sign that I had missed. But no matter how many times I went over it, the pain remained, a constant ache that refused to fade. Eventually, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living in limbo, couldn't keep letting their betrayal define me. I had to find a way to rebuild, to prove to myself that I didn't need them, that I could stand on my own. I found a job, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I threw myself into it, working long hours, saving every penny I could. It was exhausting, and there were days when I wanted to give up, to crawl back to them and beg for forgiveness. But each time, I reminded myself of the look in their eyes, the coldness in their voices, and I pressed on. Months passed, and slowly, I began to build a life for myself. I found a small, run-down house that I could afford, and though it was far from perfect, it was mine. I spent every spare moment fixing it up, painting the walls, repairing the broken windows, transforming it into a space that felt like home. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment that I had earned through my own hard work. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness was overwhelming, when the silence of the empty house felt like a weight pressing down on me. But I refused to let it break me. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. Just as I was beginning to feel like I could finally put the past behind me, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my parents standing on the porch, their faces a mixture of determination and impatience. "We need to talk," my father said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I stepped back, allowing them to enter, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. I hadn't seen them since the day they had thrown me out, and I had no idea what they wanted now. I had built this life without them, carved out a space that was mine alone. I wasn't sure I was ready to let them back in. They sat down in the living room, looking around as if they were inspecting the place, evaluating my progress. Finally, my mother spoke. "This house," she said, her eyes narrowing, "is part of the family. You may have bought it, but it belongs to us. You wouldn't have been able to afford it if we hadn't pushed you out. In a way, we helped you, and we think it's only fair that you give something back." I felt a surge of anger, the same fury that had filled me on my birthday. "This house is mine," I replied, my voice steady. "I worked for it. I paid for it. You have no right to it." My father shook his head, a faint smirk on his lips. "Don't be so naive, Alex. We've always provided for you, even when you didn't deserve it. This house is a family asset, and you're still part of this family, whether you like it or not." I could feel my hands trembling, a mixture of anger and fear swirling within me. They had taken everything from me, forced me to start over, and now they wanted to claim the one thing I had left, the one thing I had built with my own hands. I took a deep breath, meeting their gaze with a determination I hadn't felt before. "You may have been my family once, but not anymore. You made that choice when you threw me out. This house is mine, and I won't let you take it from me." They looked at each other, a silent exchange passing between them, and I could see the anger in their eyes. But I didn't back down. I had spent too long rebuilding, too long fighting for my independence, to let them take it away now. As they stood up to leave, my mother gave me one last, cold look. "This isn't over, Alex," she said. "We'll be back." I watched them walk away, a sense of dread settling over me. I knew this was only the beginning, that they would be back, that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever been, that I had built a life for myself, a life that I would protect no matter what it took. They had betrayed me once, but I wouldn't let them do it again. This time, I was ready for them. This time, I would fight back. Days passed after my parents' visit, but their words lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at the newfound sense of peace I had worked so hard to build. I tried to ignore them, to tell myself they were just empty threats, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't going to let this go. They had taken so much from me already, and now they wanted to take the one thing I had left. I knew I couldn't let that happen. It wasn't long before their threats became more tangible. I received a letter from a lawyer outlining their supposed claim to the house. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were prepared to take me to court, to fight for a house they hadn't lifted a finger to build. I felt a surge of anger, but beneath it was a gnawing fear. They had money, connections, things I didn't have. Could they actually take my home away from me? I knew I needed help, so I reached out to a lawyer of my own, someone recommended by a friend. After explaining the situation, I sat in silence as she reviewed the letter, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, a reassuring smile on her face. "Alex, based on what you've told me, your family doesn't have a legitimate legal claim. You bought this house with your own money, right? There's no joint ownership, no shared mortgage, nothing that ties them to the property?" I nodded, relief washing over me. "That's right. I paid for it myself. They didn't contribute a penny." She nodded, setting the letter aside. Then they don't have a leg to stand on. They can threaten legal action all they want, but it would be a waste of their time and money. That being said, I can't promise they won't keep trying to intimidate you. Family disputes like this can get messy. I exhaled, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Thank you. That's a relief to hear. But the relief was short-lived. Even if they didn't have a legal claim, I knew my family. They weren't going to let something like the law stop them. And sure enough, their tactics quickly escalated. One evening, I returned home to find my front door unlocked, though I was sure I had locked it before leaving. I stepped inside, my heart racing, and found the living room in disarray. Drawers were pulled open, papers scattered across the floor, and one of my picture frames lay shattered near the fireplace. My first thought was that I had been robbed, but nothing seemed to be missing. It was then that I noticed a note on the coffee table, scrawled in my father's handwriting. Asterisk, this house belongs to the family. Don't make us take it by force, asterisk. I felt a chill run down my spine, a mix of anger and fear settling over me. They had been in my home, invading my space, sending me a message as clear as day. They wanted me to feel unsafe, to doubt myself, to question whether this fight was worth it. But if anything, their intimidation only steeled my resolve. I wasn't going to let them bully me into submission. This was my home, my life, and I would fight to protect it. The next day, I found my car's tires slashed and graffiti sprayed across the fence that read, "Family First." I could barely contain my anger as I surveyed the damage, my mind racing with the implications. They weren't just trying to scare me, they were trying to break me. I called the police, filed a report, and added extra locks to my doors and windows. But even with those precautions, I felt a constant sense of unease, a nagging fear that they could strike again at any moment. Realizing that I needed more than just security measures, I began to document everything. I took photos of the damage, saved the note, and kept a log of every incident. I knew that if they were going to push me, I needed to be prepared to push back. It was time to confront them directly, to look each one of them in the eye, and let them know that I wasn't backing down. First, I want to see my father. He was at his office, a place he had always used as a symbol of his power, his authority. I walked in, feeling a mix of nerves and anger, and waited for him to look up from his desk. When he finally did, his expression was one of mild annoyance, as if I were merely an inconvenience. "Alex," he said, his tone condescending, "what brings you here?" "I'm here because of the house," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You have no right to it. I've spoken to a lawyer. You don't have a claim, and I won't let you intimidate me." He leaned back, a smirk on his face. "You think a lawyer is going to scare us off? This is family business, Alex. You can't hide behind legalities." I shook my head, meeting his gaze with a determination I hadn't felt before. "No, this is my business, and I won't let you or anyone else take what I've worked for. I'm not that scared kid you threw out. I'm done letting you control my life." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "You're making a mistake, Alex. You think you can stand against us? We'll see how long that resolve of yours lasts." I left without another word, my anger simmering beneath the surface. I knew he wouldn't back down easily, but I had said my piece. Next, I visited my mother, hoping that maybe she would be the voice of reason. But when I arrived at her house, she greeted me with the same coldness I had seen on my father's face. "You shouldn't have come here, Alex," she said, her tone flat. "You're only making things worse for yourself." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let me live my life?" She sighed, shaking her head. "We're trying to protect you, Alex. You don't understand how the world works. This house, it's more than just a piece of property. It represents your place in this family. And if you refuse to see that, then you're the one betraying us." I felt a surge of frustration, a desperate need to make her understand. "I'm not betraying anyone. I'm just trying to build a life for myself, one that's not controlled by your expectations, your rules. I deserve to have something of my own." She looked away, her expression hardening. "You'll regret this, Alex. You'll realize one day that family is all you have. And when that day comes, don't expect us to be there for you." Her words cut deep, but I held my ground, refusing to let her see the hurt they caused. I had expected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud only solidified my resolve. They weren't going to change, and I couldn't keep waiting for them to understand. Finally, I confronted my siblings. I knew they had been complicit in the intimidation, that they had stood by while our parents threatened and manipulated me. I gathered them together, hoping to appeal to their sense of fairness, to remind them that we had once been close, that we had shared a bond beyond the reach of our parents' influence. But their responses were hollow, filled with empty platitudes and justifications. "We're just following Mom and Dad's lead," my brother said, his tone defensive. "They know what's best for the family." I looked at him, feeling a sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. What about what's best for me? Don't I deserve to have something of my own, to live my own life? He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "It's not personal, Alex. It's just the way things are." And with that, I knew that I was truly alone. They had all chosen their side, chosen to follow a path that led to control, manipulation, and fear. But I refused to let them dictate my life any longer. I had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to give in now. As I walked away from the final confrontation, I felt a surge of determination. I was going to protect what was mine, no matter the cost. They could threaten, intimidate, vandalize all they wanted, but I wasn't going to back down. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would defend it against anyone who tried to take it from me, even my own family. The moment I decided to take legal action, I knew things were about to get even more intense. My family had proven they were willing to go to any lengths to take my home, and I was done sitting back and letting them control the narrative. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. My lawyer, Sarah, was thorough and relentless. She went through every piece of documentation I had, meticulously building a case that left no room for doubt. We gathered bank statements, receipts, loan documents, anything that showed a clear path from my earnings to the down payment on the house. Every paycheck I had saved, every small expense I had cut to make this dream a reality. It all became part of the story we would present in court. "They're going to try and paint you as ungrateful, as someone who wouldn't have this house without their help," Sarah warned, her eyes scanning through a stack of papers. "But the truth is, you've done this on your own. We need to make that clear." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Let them try. I'm ready. As we prepared, my family wasn't idle. I started hearing from mutual acquaintances that they were spreading lies, telling anyone who would listen that I had tricked them out of what was rightfully theirs. They even found witnesses, people who were willing to attest that my parents had provided significant financial support. It was all false, of course, but I knew they were counting on sowing enough doubt to weaken my case. Then, things got worse. One evening, I returned home to find the front windows shattered, glass scattered across the floor. My heart sank as I took in the destruction, the silent reminder that they were still trying to scare me into submission. I called the police, filed another report, and began sweeping up the mess, but the sense of violation lingered. The next day, as I was cleaning up, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Turner, watching from across the street. She was a kind, elderly woman who had always been friendly, and I could see the concern etched on her face as she approached. "Alex, are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. "I heard about what's been happening. Is there anything I can do to help?" I hesitated, the automatic response to assure her that I was fine ready on my lips. But then I realized that I didn't have to face this alone. Maybe it was time to accept the help that others were offering. I nodded, letting out a sigh. Honestly, I could use all the help I can get. My family, they're not going to stop. They're willing to do whatever it takes to make me give up. She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone, dear. We've seen what they're trying to do, and it's not right. If you need anything at all, just let us know. I'll be keeping an eye out for you, and I know others will too." True to her word, Mrs. Turner rallied the neighborhood. Over the next few days, people I had barely spoken to before started stopping by, offering words of encouragement, helping me document the damage, and keeping watch for any suspicious activity. It was a small army of support, a network of ordinary people who had decided to take a stand against the bullying tactics my family was using. One evening, a group of neighbors gathered at my house, brainstorming ways to protect the property and document everything for the upcoming court battle. Mr. Thompson, who lived down the street, suggested installing security cameras to catch any further acts of vandalism. Others offered to help install them, and within hours, we had a system in place that made me feel safer than I had in weeks. With their support, I was able to focus on gathering even more evidence for court. I dug through old bank records, found receipts for every repair and renovation I had paid for, and printed out text messages that showed my family's threats. Sarah was meticulous, making sure every detail was backed up, every accusation countered with solid proof. "They're going to try to paint you as ungrateful," Sarah said, "but we're going to show them that you're just standing up for yourself, that you've earned this home through hard work and sacrifice. We're going to make it clear that this isn't about family, it's about control." In the midst of all this preparation, I found strength I didn't know I had. Each day was a battle, but I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My neighbors became a source of comfort, a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for the community that had embraced me. They knew the kind of people my parents were, saw through the lies and manipulation, and their faith in me became a lifeline in the storm. As the court date approached, I could feel the tension mounting. I knew that my family would come prepared, that they would stop at nothing to claim what they thought was theirs. But I also knew that I had done everything I could to defend myself, that I had a network of people behind me who believed in me, who knew the truth. The night before the hearing, I found myself sitting alone in my living room, the silence pressing in around me. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the birthday betrayal that had forced me to rebuild my life from scratch. I thought about the pain, the anger, and the resilience that had grown out of that darkness. This house was more than just a building. It was a symbol of my independence, of the life I had fought to create. It represented every moment of sacrifice, every ounce of determination I had poured into proving to myself that I could stand on my own. I wasn't going to let them take that from me. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse, flanked by Sarah and a small group of neighbors who had come to show their support. I saw my family across the room, their expressions a mixture of smug confidence and barely concealed disdain. They had brought witnesses, people who I knew would lie for them, who would say anything to help them win. But I wasn't afraid. I had the truth on my side, and I was ready to fight. The hearing was grueling, with each side presenting their case, their evidence. My family's witnesses testified, spinning stories about how my parents had supported me financially, how they had helped me buy the house. But Sarah was relentless, cross-examining each one, revealing the holes in their stories, the inconsistencies that exposed their lies. When it was my turn, I presented every piece of evidence I had gathered, walking the court through each document, each receipt, each text message that showed my family's intimidation tactics. I told them about the vandalism, the threats, the way my parents had tried to claim ownership of something they had no right to. As I spoke, I could see the impact my words were having. The judge's expression shifted from skepticism to understanding, and I knew that he could see the truth, could see that this was more than just a family dispute. It was a battle for my independence, for my right to live my life on my own terms. By the end of the day, I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had done everything I could, had laid bare the truth for everyone to see. Now, all that was left was to wait for the verdict. As we left the courthouse, my neighbors surrounded me, their faces filled with pride and encouragement. "You did well, Alex," Mrs. Turner said, squeezing my hand. "No matter what happens, you've shown them that you're not afraid to stand up for yourself." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the people who had stood by me, who had given me the strength to face this battle head-on. Whatever the outcome, I knew that I had fought with everything I had, that I had refused to let them take what was mine. And as we walked away, I felt a newfound sense of hope, a belief that, no matter what, I would come out of this stronger than before. This was my life, my home, and I was finally taking control. The day of the final hearing arrived, bringing with it a mix of tension and anticipation. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, poring over every piece of evidence, every detail that would prove beyond a doubt that this house was mine. I knew my family would bring their best game, but I was ready to face them, to finally put an end to this nightmare. The courtroom was packed, filled with friends, neighbors, and even a few curious onlookers who had heard about the case. My family was already seated, projecting an air of calm confidence that felt more like a show than genuine belief. I could tell they were putting on a performance, hoping to sway the judge with their carefully curated image of a loving family, simply trying to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. As the proceedings began, my parents took the stand, their lawyer asking them to explain why they believed they had a claim to my house. My mother, ever the actress, spoke of family ties and sacrifices made, painting herself as the concerned parent who had only ever wanted the best for her child. She teared up at one point, speaking about how she had helped me through difficult times and how she was now hurt by my supposed ingratitude. When it was my turn to respond, I took a deep breath and looked around the room. I could feel the support of my neighbors, their quiet presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. Then, I began presenting my case. I spoke calmly and confidently, walking the judge through every piece of evidence I had gathered. I showed the bank statements, detailing how each payment had come from my own accounts, and the receipts that showed the countless repairs and upgrades I had paid for myself. I presented the threatening messages and described the vandalism, the intrusion into my home, the harassment that had been their desperate attempt to intimidate me into submission. With each point, I saw the facade my family had built begin to crack. My father's face hardened, his expression shifting from smugness to barely concealed anger. My mother's crocodile tears faded, replaced by a cold glare that she directed at me whenever the judge wasn't looking. It was clear that they hadn't expected me to fight back, to come prepared with evidence that would dismantle their entire case. Finally, it was time for closing statements. My family's lawyer attempted one last emotional plea, trying to paint me as an ungrateful child turning on the people who had raised me. But I could see that the judge wasn't buying it. He had seen the evidence, heard the truth, and his expression told me that he wasn't going to be swayed by theatrics. Then it was my turn. I stood up, looked directly at the judge, and said, "This isn't just about a house. This is about my right to live my life independently, free from manipulation and control. My family has tried to claim something that doesn't belong to them, something I built with my own hands. I'm not asking for anything more than what I've earned, and I'm here to protect what's rightfully mine." The judge nodded, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before delivering the verdict. I held my breath, the room silent as we all waited for his decision. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear that the property in question was purchased and maintained solely by Alex, he said, his voice firm and resolute. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the defendant, granting them full ownership of the house. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order, preventing any further harassment from the plaintiff's side. Relief washed over me like a wave. It was over. The judge's ruling had given me not just the house, but the freedom I had fought so hard to protect. My family's attempt to control my life had been defeated, and I was finally free to live on my own terms. As we exited the courthouse, my family waited for me by the steps, their expressions a mix of anger and humiliation. I could see the resentment in their eyes, the bitterness of a plan gone awry, but I felt nothing but strength and determination. I walked up to them, standing tall, meeting each of their gazes. "This ends here," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done with your games, your manipulation. You've tried to control me for too long, and I'm done letting you hold power over my life. You lost, and it's time to accept that." My mother scoffed, crossing her arms. "You think you've won? You'll regret this, Alex. You'll realize one day that family is all you have, and when that day comes, you'll have no one to turn to." I met her gaze, unflinching. If family means betrayal, manipulation, and control, then I don't need it. I'm moving forward, and I'm doing it without you. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Then, one by one, they turned and walked away, their defeat etched in their faces. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of relief and finality. This was the last time I would allow them to dictate my life, the last time I would bend under the weight of their expectations. As I turned back to face my friends and neighbors, I was greeted with smiles, handshakes, and words of encouragement. Mrs. Turner wrapped me in a warm hug, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Alex. You stood up for yourself, and you won." We returned to my house, where the neighborhood had gathered to celebrate. It wasn't a grand party, but it was filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of community that I had never felt with my own family. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I felt a sense of closure, of peace. The battle was over, and I had come out stronger, surrounded by people who truly cared. That night, as I stood on the porch, looking out at the house that was finally, unequivocally mine, I felt a sense of empowerment that I had never known. The shadows of my past had been lifted, and I was free to build a life on my own terms, unburdened by the expectations and control that had once held me captive. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like freedom. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that I had fought for my independence, and that I would never again allow anyone to take it from me. With a deep breath, I stepped back into the house, closing the door on the chapter that had defined so much of my life. It was time to start anew, to create a future that was entirely my own. And as I took that first step, I knew that I was finally free. If you like this story, subscribe right away and listen to new stories every day. Let us know what you like the most in the comments.